Kuwait remains firm in its decision to ban entry visas for Filipinos. Now, this after the Philippines supposedly rejected conditions set by the Gulf state during their bilateral talks.
And the Foreign Affairs Department sees no need for the Philippines to apologize to Kuwait amid the ongoing entry visa issue.
Hindi tayo hihingi ng tawad dahil bakit tayo humingi pa tayo ng tawad dahil sa mga naabusong mga mail? Yung position natin is wala tayong violations at kung meron man, kailangan pakinggan nila yung ating paliwanag na meron ding international law obligation or function yung mga embassies na protektahan yung kanilang mga nationals, no?
We don't want to burn bridges with them. We don't want to say that we're not going to send anybody else to Kuwait anymore. But at the same time, everything that we will be doing as far as our nationals they are concerned is for their well-being. And we trust that there are Kuwaiti laws and regulations that will look after that part as well.
The Kuwaiti government is enumerating quite a few reasons why it says it has to refuse new entry visas for Filipinos and had since urged Manila to make amends. But the Philippine government is not budging, at least for now. The Foreign Affairs Department says it will only tackle the issue until, quote, cooler heads prevail. Let's talk about this in this episode of The Chiefs. Welcome to The Chiefs. Ako po si Robbie Alampay at kasama ko po sa studio ngayon Ana Marie Pamintuan, Editor-in-Chief po ng Philippine Star, Ed Lingao of One News, and Lucy Cruz Valdez, Head of News 5. Chiefs,
Good evening.
Good evening.
Kompleto tayo ngayon.
Ano nangyayari dito sa Kuwait?
Ito nga yung deadlock nga yata yung usapan dahil
hanggang ngayon, hindi pa natin alam kung ano, di ba?
Diba, ayaw na nilang tanggapin lahat ng visa na reject. Pati yung mga ano nga di ba, yung mga hindi naman working visa or...
Sabi ng iba huwag na tayo magpadala doon dahil ang dami-dami, ang nahaba na ng
sila pa ang galit.
mga cases,
Kaya nga,
Parang ganun
dati kasi
yung
parang
ano
tayong galit sa kanila, ngayon tayo galit sa atin.
sila pa yung galit.
Hindi, ayun nga, bakit nangyayari ito? Parang inuunahan tayo? O ano yung
Hindi, kasi yung dahil nga sa dami ng mga inabusong OFW na brutal at minorder, nilagay sa freezer, binaon sa disyerto.
Sinunog.
Kaya tinutulungan siyempre ng ating mission doon, lahat ng Pilipino. At pag may tumatakbo, siyempre tatanggapin mo, tao natin yun, Pilipino yun
Tsaka hinahanting, yung sinusundo pa.
Nagagalit Kuwait, bakit gano'n? Parang it's a form of intervention nga pa. At nagre-reklamo yung mga employer doon na gano'n, bigla nang nawawala yung kanila. Na may kontrata sa kanila, tapos wala na, goodbye na, uwi na sa Pilipinas, wala na, paano na daw yun?
So, yeah, malinaw po, and that's it for the Chiefs. Siyempre marami po tayong tanong. At we have a guest other than Ami Pamintuan. We have a DFA official joining us after this break. Lilinawin po natin lahat yan. The Chiefs will be right back.
And welcome back to the program. Joining us this evening via Zoom is DFA Undersecretary Eduardo De Vega. Sir, magandang gabi and welcome to the Chiefs.
Magandang gabi.
Good evening, sir.
Magandang gabi po.
Good evening, sir. Thank you for joining us, sir. Sir, I suppose a question on everybody's mind, medyo counterintuitive ng konti, pero so nagagalit ang Kuwait dahil among other things, tumutulong ang ating embassy sa mga runaways at nagbibigay ng shelter. To begin with ba, is that prohibited under any rule in the international community, in diplomacy or whatever? How does it go? How are these things interpreted?
Well, our position is that it is not a violation. We need a violation because under Vienna Convention on Consular Relations, it's a function of it's a consular function protecting your workers. Ang possible violation, if that is the case, is if you are harboring criminals. In other words, kunyari, you are encouraging Filipinos to escape from their employers, lalo na kung mga Filipino na may ginawang kasalanan sa employer, kunyari ninakawan, ganyan, tapos tatago namin kayo. However, the mere fact na may isang kababayan kayo, a citizen of your country, asks for help because he or she mostly, is being abused, and then you give them shelter, we do not see that as a violation at all. Now, there are internal rules in Kuwait which have to be respected. For example, there is a process for repatriating or for sending home workers who run away from their employer. So we'll have to work with the Kuwaitis on that. And we have been working with them in recent weeks on that. So first, the premise that we're violating rules, no, we don't accept that. We will say, though, in 2018, we already apologized to Kuwait kasi if you remember, in 2018,
Yes, sir.
they were even filming mga Filipinos running away from the raids. So parang ina-encourage pa to run away. They were filming them and then they're shown even to the media. Now that might be that might be a violation or certainly something which is intrusive of Kuwaiti sovereignty. But the mere fact that you operate a shelter, we don't think so. And there are shelters in other countries, and they're not complaining about our shelters.
Sir, pero where does one country draw the line between, protecting our nationals or protecting the nationals of a certain country versus, I don't know, interfering with internal matters?
As far as the Department of Foreign Affairs is concerned, we are obligated to protect our nationals, especially in places where there has already been a record of, abuses or even deaths, as far as we know. Where do we draw the line? Well, certainly we're not going to commit violations, clear violations of the sovereignty or the internal rules of Kuwait. So you have to meet halfway. However, having to apologize or having to even punish our own workers, our own government people for doing their job, in our mind, that's not right. And we've told the Kuwaitis this, no? So, ganito pa, isa pa, no? You might apologize, and then you will still commit the same violations they're complaining about. So why not just work with them? And we have some good news about that because in recent weeks, after a delegation came back, we're quietly working with them. Gusto nila sa kanilang shelter, may shelter din in Kuwait, dali ng mga Pilipino. So, our point is, we bring them there, but you have to process their exit permits quicker. So, in recent weeks, quietly, there have been over 400 Filipinos who have come home. Problema lang, yung shelter natin, it's never emptied. Palaging every week may nadagdagan na bago, no? However, it's a good sign that the Kuwaitis showed that they're able to process papers quicker if that's what it takes for us to fully work within their system. However, the idea of closing the shelter, no, that's not the mentality of the Philippines. No, saan pa sila? But at least, ang maganda naman sa Kuwaiti shelter, mas malaki, and pwede naman sila bisitahin at bigyan ng Filipino food and so forth. No? Pero syempre, originally, ang mas gusto nila muna sa embassy muna sila o sa Kuwaiti embassy natin sa ating officials muna bigyan ng shelter. So we're working quietly with them and looking forward to reopening of our talks.
Yusek, I want to zoom out and just for an objective context to what's happening in Kuwait for our countrymen. As you said, every country has a right to protect its citizens, and then you said, quote, especially in places where we notice where there has been attacks and violations of their rights. I just want to understand the context of Kuwait as, I presume, one of these special places. The Department of Migrant Workers says there's about 268,000 Filipino workers there. They said in 2022 alone, 24,000 cases of violation and abuse against Filipino workers. That's 9%, almost 10%. How does that compare to other destination countries of OFW, when we say that in 2022, that was about 10% of our migrant workers were reporting cases, if that's an accurate way of putting it.
Well, another way to put it is this. In our shelter in Kuwait, we usually have at least 100, many hundred, in fact, usually 200, 300 at any given time. We have similar shelters for example, in Jeddah, in Riyadh, and all over the Middle East, where there may be even more Filipinos. We have a shelter in Abu Dhabi and Dubai. They very rarely have more than 50 runaways. Whereas in Kuwait, you have a few hundred all the time. So that's a sign, that's an indication. Maybe clarify, Kuwait remains a friend and partner. We do not blame the Kuwaiti government for this, but we would like to work with them to strengthen the protective mechanisms. Now, why did I mention that part, that we have to protect our kababayans, especially in places where there is a history of this? Well, that's why we had a suspension of the deployment of kasambahay, of household workers, because of what happened last February with Jollibee Ranara, the latest case of a Filipino. So there was a public clamor, and until we have strengthened the mechanisms to protect them, then what we wanted was to limit it to skilled workers. But now the Kuwaitis have said, no, never mind, no skilled, no.
Yun na nga eh. I was going to ask you, what happened there? Why did the table seem to have turned? Kasi nung 2018, di ba, si then President Duterte, this was after the incident of this domestic helper na nilagay pa sa freezer.
Si Joanna Dimafelis.
Yes, si Dimafelis. And President Duterte then said, let's ban sending our workers to Kuwait. And that temporary ban became even permanent, no? Tapos ngayon, para ang dating sila pa ngayon yung baliktad na eh. It's now Kuwait saying, no, we're not taking any workers from you. No Pinoys from you. Not at all. Parang they seem to now have the upper hand. I mean, what happened there? Did we drop the ball? And then all of a sudden, sila na yung nagdidikta?
No, well, I wouldn't say sila nagdidikta. They are pressuring us to reconsider our suspension of the deployment of household workers. Parang sinasabi, well, if you're not going to send that to us because of problems, well, might as well not send anybody. So that's their subtle way to pressure us. Remember, well, not subtle way, wala. Remember, in 2018, after we banned, we still lifted the ban after we signed this agreement, no? Except this time, and I, as a Foreign Service officer, as a representative of the Department of Foreign Affairs, would like to thank you, the media, and our public for supporting the government and our kababayans, our kasambahays, all the way since this happened, no? Itong ban ng Kuwait, no? What they did not expect, I think, was this time we would be firm. President Marcos would be firm. The DFA would be firm, the MW would be firm, that we don't have to apologize, and we'll have to continue working to protect our workers. And we're not suddenly, just like that, going to lift our suspension of kasambahays, if only for you to lift naman the ban on other Filipinos. Let us talk, let us improve the conditions, and then eventually we may go back, we hope to get back to the previous situation. Our president has already said we don't intend this to be a permanent ban. However, well, we can throw the question back to you, our dear friends and partners on the media. Just to have our workers go back there, skilled workers and all, tourists and etc. We'll say, sige na, we'll send household workers again.
Pero Yusek, do we have a formal agreement with Kuwait on helping OFWs in distress? Kasi parang yun lang naman ang punto nila, di ba, na bakit, although hindi nga nangyayari ngayon, yung what happened in 2018, parang sinasabi nila may breach, no, of an agreement. Is there any particular formal agreement on how to help our OFWs kapag nagkaganyan. Kasi syempre yung iba nilang employer, sinasabi din, di naman namin naabuso yan, bakit kinukuha nila? Runaway lang yan, gusto lang umuwi, tapos kukunin nila. Merong mga naririnig din ganon. Paano yun? How do you determine kung inaabuso nga? Saka, are we breaking any particular rules talaga?
Well, I looked at the 2018 agreement. It doesn't talk about the actual procedure for repatriating Filipinos. It just says which government agencies atin, which government agencies sa kanila, how they will be verified, their contracts will be verified, and so forth. It's understood that both countries are committed to respecting each other's laws, no? Okay. In my honest opinion, in our honest opinion, the Kuwaitis are just saying that, we will show you that we'll try getting workers from other countries.
Have they succeeded?
You know, so as far as we're concerned, we won't, hindi natin sabihin sa kanila, hindi tayo magsusumamo, hindi tayo please, kawawa naman. I mean, and by the way, we do not have complaints from OFWs about this. We don't have a group, we can ask the DMW also, wala nagrarally, wala nagsasabi sa amin, no, sige na, pumayag na kayo sa Kuwait. Wala. In fact, it's quite the opposite. They're saying, no, supportahan natin itong move na to. No? Ganun pa man. It's not a surprise that there's still a ban because it started in May, and we completely knew that when we sent a team, we were not going to conclude this right away. And there's still the summer month of June in Kuwait. So in July, we hope to resume. So eventually, you mentioned, I was the one who said now when cooler heads prevail. I think cooler heads are prevailing. A good example, last May 30, our ambassador designate in Kuwait, si Ambassador Jose Peps Cabrera, finally got to present his formal credentials as the ambassador to Kuwait. Now, there was a talk before na baka pauwiin siya ng Kuwait out of, that's a process called persona non grata, kung galit sila sa isang bansa. They did not. Instead, they said, okay, present your credentials officially to the Emir so that you are officially accredited as ambassador. And he's been there for quite some time, ilang buwan na. That is a positive step. Of course, the fact also that right now their latest words, they're not asking for an apology anymore. We don't see it anymore. They just want us to continue working with them about the issues at hand. And there's somebody here with me, if I could introduce him to you, who is in charge of our Middle East desk. And he was the one who was in Kuwait recently, and he could compare the attitude then presented by the Kuwaiti government towards the issue as compared to now.
Yes,
Ambassador Boy Melicor, the Assistant Secretary for Middle East Affairs, who was there. And well, consult him, kasi ito yung ating, kamusta? So, Asek, ano yung situation ngayon according to, sa yung ating according to our embassy, yung reports nila, no?
Actually, magandang gabi po sa inyong lahat.
Magandang gabi po.
Good evening,
Good evening, sir.
I was asked by USEC to join him in these interviews kasi there might be interesting questions from you na gustong malaman ng ating mga kababayan. Pero ang tanong is, how much has the atmosphere changed? Actually, it has changed a lot. Parang nag-mellow down, if you would like to describe it that way, na hindi na masyado silang demanding sa ating mga sa side ng Pilipinas. Parang sinasabi lang nila na they are looking elsewhere daw for sources of employees. They will continue to work with us. Parang in a sense, they echo what our president said na they're not burning bridges.
Yes.
Sir, pero
But
sir, mukhang saan patungo ito? Where do you see this being resolved? In what direction?
Yes.
Kasi mukhang nagpapatigasan eh. Diba? We have a point. They think they have a point, and we're trying to see who gives in first or who gives the most concession.
Well, the end goal eventually is, it's always to resume deployment. I mean, although
Yes, sir.
where the Department of Foreign Affairs is concerned, no, our goal is protection, no, not we're not the ones regulating deployment. It's a DMW.
Yes, sir.
But for purposes of bilateral relations, to maximize bilateral relations, the end goal is to be able to come out with the protective mechanisms for our kasambahays and a better system of cooperation between our embassy and kasama na yung OWA welfare officer at yung DMW attaché doon with the Kuwaiti authority. So the end goal is, well, eventually to resume deployment. Of course, we'd like it to be skilled workers muna. And then pag nag-improve yung paraan, yung conditions for household workers, how to protect them. Also, household workers. Our president has said that now we don't intend a permanent ban. It's better the timeline. As far as we're concerned, we are not going to do it quickly kasi hindi pwede yung mabilisan or urada para lang balik na tayo sa status quo. And then, next year, magbaban na naman tayo. We're going to be able to ban, lift, ban, suspend and lift, suspend and lift. No, we have to make it something more.
But Yusek, I mean, before we get to the end goals, and while we are in this current situation, which is basically a negotiation, what are the areas and points of negotiation? Where are there any areas of compromise or, for that matter, commonality?
The commonality is that both of us, right now at least, and kasasabi lang ni Asik Medicor, no? Medyo, shall we say, lumumig na yung ulo, parang we haven't burned bridges. The Kuwaiti ambassador was at the diplomatic reception at Malacanang on June 12th. I met him and he was cheerful, parang hopeful for the future. So that's a start. Both countries agree that we have to maintain contact, maintain discussions. Next, both countries agree that we have to make it easier for the Filipinos in the shelter. Ayaw rin ng Kuwait na masyadong maraming Pilipino sa ating shelter. Hindi lang ngayon, they're not telling us anymore to close the shelter. Well, maybe that's what they still hope to happen, but they're not putting it in writing, they're not saying it anymore. So what instead they're doing is making it easier for us to use the Kuwaiti system by transferring them to the Kuwaiti authorities for repatriation to the Philippines. Of course, they would report it like they were deporting the Filipinos. But actually, deportation implies that ayaw yung Pilipino umalis. This time, gusto nila umuwi. You know why? Kaya tumatagal sila, kaya nagiging congested yung shelter because it would take months and months and months for the Kuwaiti exit permits to release because they essentially ran away from their employees without finishing the contracts. But now, binibilisan na. So that's another step. And the third, sabi rin ng Kuwaiti ambassador, yes, July is very possible that we can begin negotiations. So it's a long, painful process. But in the end, our intention is the maximum protection for our kababayans. Because, masakit para sa ating mga kababayan kung maraming runaway or especially pag mayroon na namang, pinatay ng kababayan natin. We don't blame the Kuwaitis, the entire Kuwaiti people for that. But they also have to understand if they feel slighted, that their sovereignty was supposedly trampled by us. Of course, the Filipino people also feel hurt whenever a kababayan of ours is brutally murdered abroad. We do appreciate that the justice system is working. There have been a few hearings. The next hearing for the Renara case is June 22. So they are fast-tracking that process. So that's a very positive step, no? So, perhaps, maybe I'll ask Asek Boy. Would you say, Asek Boy, they did not expect us to be so, firm in our commitment not to just give in right away and say, oh, sige, we will apologize, we will, just for you to lift the ban or
Sige,
something.
Ambassador, ano ba? How do you read them?
The impression at the start was that they were very, very aggrieved by the alleged violations of our embassy. But I think they were reckoning that the Philippines would just say, oh, we will do this and that. But we referred everything to Manila because we had no authority to answer those things they were asking us. And Manila was very firm. There was firm and clear instructions to the negotiating team what to do. And although the talks did not proceed as planned, there were informal discussions. And so we said goodbye and said perhaps we could meet again on another time when the cooler heads would prevail.
Ambassador, siguro yun na lang yung last question namin, no? When will that be? When will be that next time when cooler heads have in fact prevailed? And who starts that process again? Will it be us or are we waiting for them?
From our side po, we are always ready anytime to talk with them. So we are just waiting for that signal for them to say, why don't we talk again? Because they were the ones who also invited us to meet and talk. They were the ones who said in February, let's talk. So that's why we prepared and we came in May. But Yusek, I think you have another...
Our position is it's happening already.
Okay.
And partly kaya mainit dahil it's summer.
Yeah.
We're pretty sure in July there will be a better mood about it, between both countries. The fact that we're not talking anymore about apologies, neither the Kuwaitis or the Filipinos, or about we are not even raising the death cases specifically. We trust that they will render justice para kay Ranara. We're just saying we have to sit down and talk. And I think the cooling off period is beginning. We just have to be patient on the part of the Philippines. It's not going to be resolved in 1 or 2 months or 1 or 2 negotiations. Perhaps, hopefully, by the end of the year, maybe. I'm sure they appreciated that President Marcos said we're not envisioning a total ban. Of course, our relations with Kuwait are not completely about household workers. No, remember, out of the 275, our numbers are 275,000. 2/3, perhaps, or 70% are household workers, which means 30% are not. So let's be optimistic. However, at the same time, the Kuwaitis now are trying to try other workers also. Let's see, maybe it'll work out. But tayo naman, our DMW said that if not in Kuwait, we'll see if there are other markets. We are going to protect our workers and defend the national dignity and honor. Of course, the Kuwaitis feel the same way. So, let's...
Okay. All right. Okay. So that's a step in. Well, positive direction, let's hope. Salamat po, Yusek Eduardo De Vega and Asek Boy Melicor. We're starting up another conversation right after this breather. Salamat po. Keep it here on the Chiefs.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Welcome back to the program. Joining us now to talk about the Maharlika Investment Fund Bill is JC Punong Bayan. He's an associate professor at the University of the Philippines, School of Economics. Welcome back to the Chiefs, JC. Good evening.
Good evening,
Good evening, sir.
Prof.
Magandang
JC.
gabi, Prof.
Thank you, everyone. Good evening.
Hi, JC. Yung economic team natin, they're all members. They are all alumni of the UP School of Economics. On the other, and they are pushing...
Senior professors.
Yes, and they are pushing for the Maharlika Investment Fund very strongly. On the other hand, 21 professors of the UP School of Economics have come out with a strongly worded statement raising reservations lang naman on this bill. Can you tell us kung bakit nag-issue kayo ng ganitong statement?
Yes, Ami. Actually, in the past, the UP School of Economics has also pushed for these kinds of statements, including, for example, the fiscal crisis in the early 2000s, as well as yung RH bill debates. So we find that this is also an opportunity for the UP School of Economics to educate the public about the nature of sovereign wealth funds and strategic investment funds, especially since there has been a lot of confusion about it. And even the lawmakers and proponents are quite confused about what it really is and what it is for. For example, BSP Governor Felipe Medalla, who was a former dean of the UP School of Economics, said that he's not quite sure what it will be for. And if they are confused, then what more the general public? So above anything else, this is an opportunity for the UP School of Economics to teach the public as well.
JC, and to your point, ang isang ang basic na tanong, is this still, in fact, a sovereign wealth fund, or is this a development fund / an investment fund? Kayo, anong sagot nyo? From what it looks like right now, what is it? And I guess another way to ask it is, can it be both? Theoretically, can it serve both masters of being a sovereign wealth fund and being a development fund?
Defining the nature of Maharlika is really quite important at the outset, Sir Robbie. Kasi yung sovereign wealth funds, for example, these primarily invest in financial instruments, whereas so-called strategic investment funds, or SIFs, invest in both financial instruments as well as economic projects. So the distinction is quite crucial because it will define the expectations that we have. For example, any returns to the investments that we expect. We have to note that the returns from economic investments are a lot different from the returns from financial investment. So, for example, for economic projects, the returns won't be reaped anytime soon, and it's really quite difficult to measure the returns to economic projects vis-a-vis financial instruments and investments. So this will also dictate, for example, or allow Congress to assess the success of the Maharlika Investment Fund. But if we are not clear at the outset what it really is, then it will be hard to, for example, ensure accountability later on, especially if losses are incurred.
Pero sir, wouldn't or shouldn't Secretary Diokno and Secretary Medalla and all these people in the economic team, shouldn't they also know the difference? And how do you think they factored it in when they decided to push this fund?
Well, actually, Sir Ed, the term strategic investment fund was not at all mentioned during the congressional deliberations and in any of the pronouncements of the economic managers. Throughout, and even in the bill itself, they still call it a sovereign wealth fund. In the discussion paper that we published, we make this kind of distinction. It's really properly called a strategic investment fund, and it's not as if it's the first time anyone will do this worldwide. In fact, there are many kinds of strategic investment funds globally, and we just need to learn from the best practices that have been adopted.
Okay, your paper says that this MIF, as it stands now, violates fundamental issues of economics and finance and poses serious risks to the economy. What would be those serious risks?
Well, I think first and foremost, Ma'am Lucci, it would be the governance risks, especially since it is a strategic investment fund. So public funds will be roped in, coming, for example, from the Land Bank of the Philippines, Development Bank of the Philippines, taxpayers' money, as well as the declared dividends of the BSP. And in fact, they are still thinking of roping in funds from the GSIS and SSS. So insofar as public funds will be roped in, it's all the more important for Maharlika to have a robust governance system in place. However, as we noted in the discussion paper, there's no independence, for example, of the board of Maharlika Investment Corporation from politicians. In fact, all of the 100% or literally all of the members of the board are presidential appointees. And this already violates the basic principles of the so-called Santiago principles, globally accepted set of principles that should be observed by sovereign wealth funds and similar funds. So there ought to be that kind of independence. However, there's no independence at all given the current structure as stipulated in the bill. So that in itself is the hugest risk here, especially since the returns to many of the investments are not at all assured. For example, they cite the magical 8.6% return. However, we are still wondering where they got that number, and there's no assurance at all that we will get that return as soon as possible, if at all.
Sir, to that point, sinabi nyo nga, it is far from being assured, but To be more precise, in your statement, it said, it is unlikely that the MIF will be able to crowd in investments and eke out returns that are large enough for the fund to grow substantially, and so on and so forth. Could you expound on that? Basically, are we understanding that right? That even if we get beyond the governance issues and just talk about performance and anticipated performance, you're essentially saying this is not likely to really perform or even to really succeed.
Yes, Sir Robbie. So actually, many multilateral organizations like the World Bank have already said that in the next year and in the coming years, we will be facing a lot of economic headwinds, including slower economic growth, persistently high inflation rates, and persistently high interest rates. And all of these will make it difficult for Maharlika to chase investments with high returns globally, because everyone will be doing the same, and we will be competing with many different funds and many types of investors. So I think the point about higher interest rates is quite crucial, because as we know from basic economics, the present value of inflows or earnings from investments will be reduced as long as interest rates are still persistently high. So this in itself will pose a risk and will mean that the returns from any kind of investment coming from Maharlika will be quite small, at least compared to what we are expecting.
But when you talk about headwinds, are you in effect just saying that this is bad timing? Or is it? But doesn't that leave room then for the managers of this fund later on to say that, yeah, it's bad timing, we've acknowledged that, there are going to be risks, we're going to have to analyze the situation, but we will get to a situation as well that this might be an opportunity.
Yes, actually, we should look at the experience, for example, of the Indonesia Investment Authority, or INA. So it was set up in 2021 with an initial infusion of $5 billion US, and they target actually to raise $200 billion by 2024. However, as of the start of this year, January 2023, they were only able to raise $27 billion. So many people are citing the Indonesia Investment Authority as a template or a model for our own Maharlika Investment Fund, but in fact, the INA itself is finding it quite difficult to raise its own money for its own investments. And up until recently, actually, they still don't have foreign investors, even if they were already set up back in 2021. So, yeah, I mean, the principle itself of establishing a strategic investment fund is not at all bad. However, aside from bad timing, we also have poor governance structure based on the bill that was passed.
Yeah, JC, yung Indonesia Fund, it's controlled by the private sector mostly, right? Unlike in our case, tatlo lang yung from the private sector, but they will also be appointed by the president. That's one of the issues you raised in your position paper.
Yes, actually, the Indonesia Investment Authority will also be roping in investments from abroad, so they will have get co-investors as well, and that's quite similar to what they intend to do with the Maharlika Investment Fund. However, this type of sovereign wealth fund is really quite rare. In fact, it's so-called sui generis. It's in a class of its own. So it's really hard to establish a Maharlika investment fund with that kind of template. We only have one observation or one data point here to study. So I think there needs to be greater evaluation of the success of other similar funds, not exactly the one like INA, but other strategic investment funds. And there are plenty of other SIFs that we can learn from.
JC, the issues you raised against the MIF bill, are they fatal flaws, or can they be corrected, for example, by remedial legislation? Kasi yun ang sinasabi ng iba eh. Kung ano yung mga reklamo nyo, ayusin na lang natin later.
Yes, as we said in the discussion paper, maybe it will be best for the president to veto the bill or for Congress to withdraw their bill so that there's more time to discuss. Because many of the flaws of the Maharlika Investment Fund are in the bill itself. And the implementing rules and regulations, no matter how good, will do only so much to correct many of the fundamental flaws of the bill. So best to veto or withdraw the bill entirely. And above anything else, the public must also be invited to discuss and scrutinize the proposal. After all, the public funds are at stake, so the public must be involved.
Sir, I'll go back to the distinction between a sovereign wealth fund and the sovereign investment fund. Because some people might argue that in the end, it's a matter of semantics. I mean, not me. I'm saying some people might argue that. Na parang what's the difference if the goal is the same, which is to raise money for us to spend? How do you address that question?
Yes, I think the main difference is that strategic investment funds will also pour money into economic investments. However, in the establishing law, there ought to be parameters in the kinds of investments that Maharlika will invest in. For example, the global investor Stephen Kuncheng said that Maharlika right now will be able to invest everything, everywhere, and all at once. So in other countries, for example, there are certain limits to the types of investments. For example, in certain countries, only 10% of the earnings of the sovereign wealth fund will be invested in economic projects, whereas 90% will be in financial instruments. Or in other countries, they prioritize more economic projects compared to financial investments. So this is quite crucial because the returns to financial investments are really quite different and a lot easier to measure compared to economic investments. The president said that Maharlika will be used to finance many projects, including roads, for example, and other types of infrastructure. But the returns to Maharlika will be reaped. Will not be reaped until a long time, possibly 5 to 10 years or even longer. So if there are other ways of financing such projects, for example, public-private partnerships or through the national budget, then maybe that's the better way to go.
So I think moving forward then, if you think that, or if you're suggesting that it might be better to withdraw the bill first and study it further, what's the way forward if you were to be asked? What needs to be amended? What needs to be changed? Do we go back to the fundamental definition of what this fund really ought to be and draw on the limitations according to the law and apply them? And if at all, that's when we decide whether we should even need it at this time. What are you forwarding as suggestions?
Well, I think my colleagues at the UP School of Economics will be more than willing to help out in this capacity. For example, to assist lawmakers in trying to craft a better bill. However, the unusual speed by which they passed this bill is really quite alarming, and it really didn't give any opportunity for other experts as well as the public to scrutinize the bill. But I think if this is withdrawn for one reason or another, the UP School of Economics and many other economists and analysts, I think, will be able to help out.
JC, makikimarites lang ako. Gaya nga ng sabi mo, hindi naman kakaiba sa UP School of Economics na mag-issue ng statement. You've issued many statements, but really one of the contexts here that makes this special is to Ami's first question. This is your community, this is the UP School of Economics, really trying to address your own alumni who are managing, are the economic managers of the country right now. I'm just wondering, what's the reception? Ano yung tsura ng Viber group nyo? I assume mayroong Viber group dyan ng mga UP School of Economics alumni, whether you're in government or not in government. I'm just wondering, what's the reception on both sides to your statement? And when I say both sides, I'm talking about you who issued the statement and your alumni now in government, in the different branches of government for that matter.
May nag-unfriend na ba ganun?
Has anybody left the group?
Anong nawamayaning emoji?
Palitan ng emoji.
Yes, actually, you can imagine that many of the Viber groups ng mga economists, medyo umuusok siya in the past couple of weeks and months, there's been a lot of discussion and for some people, a lot of disappointment as well. Kasi invariably, the economic team is carrying the name of the UP School of Economics, with NEDA Secretary Balisacan and BSP Governor Medalla being former deans, and then Professor Jokno, Professor Emeritus, and a long-time Professor of Public Economics. In fact, si Governor Medalla, naging prof ko pa yan sa Public Economics din during my undergrad years. I think we're coming in here as parang we want to be as constructive as possible as well. Pero as we mentioned in the discussion paper, we are also appealing to our colleagues who are in government right now to really reassess their position here kasi public funds are really at stake, and in fact the job of an economist is really to make sure that especially those in public office na hindi masasayang itong pera ng taong bayan, and I think they are in a very good position to try to stop this. So I hope there's still room and they can still change their minds.
JC, we understand the government wants to invite investors, no? Well, medyo magulo yung nature sa amin ng fund pa rin eh. But, investments require a lot of confidence. The way this bill is crafted now, lahat tayo gulong-gulo. Lahat kami gulong-gulo. You think they will actually be able to invite significant investments? Can they encourage organizations or persons or groups to put their money kung saan man gusto ng gobyerno yung money na yon?
Well, the business seems to welcome it, Ami.
Yan na nga, tinatanong ko.
I think it's really quite basic na for example kung makita ng mga investors na hindi maganda yung governance structure, for example kung walang mananagot in the event of losses from different investments, then the money that will be put in by co-investors, for example, can really disappear unless it will be guaranteed by government, in which case the government must stand ready to have sufficient funds to shoulder the losses of Maharlika Investment Fund. And right now, in fact, last year, we had a budget deficit of 1.6 trillion pesos. So right now, we really don't have surplus funds. So I think yung principle dito ay huwag mong isusugal yung pera ng iba at yung pera na wala ka naman. So I think it's okay for this type of fund to incur losses, pero the government must ensure that it will be able to shoulder any such losses. However, for example, it's really quite telling that in the bill, there are no provisions about bankruptcy of Maharlika Investment Fund, and there are no provisions regarding the ability of government to withdraw funds coming from the Maharlika Investment Fund's money. So those are crucial provisions that will ensure and give confidence to prospective investors that their money will be safe. But in the absence of such provisions, they will be hard put to attract sufficiently many investors here.
Okay. UP School of Economics Professor JC Punong Bayan. Sir, maraming salamat po sa inyo.
Thank you.
Salamat,
Thank you, sir.
Sir JC.
Maraming salamat din.
And that is all we have for the Chiefs. We hope what was discussed will keep the conversation going. I'm Robbie Alampay.
I'm Ami Pamintuan of the Philippine Star.
I'm Lucy Cruz Valdez of News 5.
I'm Ed Lingao. We are One News, all sides, all the time.